This is Paul Hammond speaking. I guess you'd call me the leader of this 28,000-mile expedition. My wife, Rosie, had her problems keeping us fed and healthy in 21 countries. Steve, 16, was assistant driver and mechanic for our 10-speed carryall. Nat, 14, made this movie record of the 11-month trip through South and Central America, while John, 10, was our water boy and general helper. We sailed from New York to Rio de Janeiro. By car, plane, and train, we explored this country before picking up our carryall and trailer in Montevideo, Uruguay. We went west and south in Argentina till the roads ran out, then north through Chile, to Bolivia, to the Inca ruins in Peru, further north to Ecuador, and then slightly east through Colombia and Venezuela. There we shipped to Panama and continued on through Central America, Mexico, and home to Lansing, Michigan. After 5 years of planning, we were finally hitching up our traveling home, the Buen Vecino, or Good Neighbor, ready to take off on the Hammond's most ambitious adventure. We had a specially equipped vehicle for rough going, maps, supplies, the best wishes of family and friends, and a boundless enthusiasm for this project to tour South and Central America. In New York, we loaded our outfit and ourselves aboard the Bao Santos for the 2-week trip to Rio. Because of Brazilian regulations, we planned to pick up the Buen Vecino later at Montevideo, Uruguay. Rosie told me to pinch her. It was hard to believe we were finally underway. As the wonderful blue Atlantic slid past, we amused ourselves in the tiny pool made of lashed canvas and filled with warm seawater. We reached the harbor of Rio in a heavy fog, and while the tugs were warping us in, our friend Francois Moreau came aboard to welcome us to his country. Rio was fascinating, ultra-modern architecture against surrounding mountains. Our hotel was right on the famous Copacabana beach, and the boys lost no time in trying out the surf. We loved Rio, but we wanted to see more of Brazil, and Francois had loaned us a new Volkswagen bus to drive to Sao Paulo. On the way, we made a side trip to San Sebastian. We came out over the ocean. The view was superb, with dense green jungle, lofty peaks, the curving South Atlantic, and mountainous islands. Real Airlines flew us to Curitiba. Here we could catch the amazing railway to Paranaguá, masterpiece of engineering built many years ago. Then, deep into the jungles to visit Iguazu Falls. The smoke-like mist rises from a waterfall as great and majestic as Niagara and far wider, in a setting of wonderful tropical beauty at the point where Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay meet. At home, this would be a great tourist attraction, here virtually unnoticed in the lush forests of Brazil. We flew to Montevideo in a happy reunion with the Buen Vecino. It was good to be back at home. The capital of Uruguay is a prideful city, quite equal in quality to any metropolis in our hemisphere. We drove past the Legislative Palace and reminded ourselves that the city takes its name from the cry of Magellan's lookout when he sighted the only hill on the banks of the Rio Plata, a river so wide we had to ship across by freighter. We didn't know it yet, but this was only the first of many loadings and unloadings we would have to negotiate to get across the gaps in the road. In South America, the common method of travel is by plane. Distances are enormous, and landing fields are far easier to build than highways that must wind up and down from sea level to over 14,000 feet. But we wanted to do it the hard way, so we'd really get to know our southern neighbors. In Buenos Aires, we drove past the National Congress building and saw remainders of the last revolution. The Buen Vecino was easily parked in a charming garden where the boys could revel in the pool. But it was time to push on if we were to accomplish one of our major objectives, to visit the Christ of the Andes. Our road was reasonably good, but we found teamwork was necessary at the bridges. We've been trailering as a family since 1949, and we worked out a pretty good method of operating. In South America, we were usually going up and coming down. The level stretches seem short by comparison with the winding, climbing roads. And I must confess that this is my particular thrill. A rough mountain road leading to an unknown pass, geography in the raw. The bridges got more primitive as we pushed west across Argentina, following a route through Rosario, Cordoba, and San Luis. This part of the country is mostly high pampas, the cattle-growing country of Argentina. Where there are no bridges, you ford the rivers. As you can see, we had our rig designed for extra clearance, and of course we had four-wheel drive plus a power winch for emergencies. Then we really began to climb as we headed into the Andes. The road made constant hairpin turns, running along the ledge cut into the side of the mountain. Argentine police posts are frequent but very friendly, and now we face the Great Wall of the Andes, where the mountains average 15,000 to 20,000 feet above sea level and are snow-covered all year long. After summer temperatures, we really felt the cold, and everyone had to look for heavy clothing. This is Aconcagua, highest peak in our hemisphere, and at the pass, 13,000 feet above sea level, is El Cristo Redentor, or Christ of the Andes, a statue erected by Chileans and Argentines as a sign of everlasting peace between their two countries. The grandeur and majesty of these mighty Andean peaks made a never-to-be-forgotten sight. We retraced our route down to Mendoza, acknowledging that part of the success of our trip was due to the wonderful hospitality of South American friends like Virgilio San Martino. From Mendoza, we headed due south toward the Argentine lake country, about 1,500 miles further toward the tip of South America. We left the vegetation of the mountains behind us and were once again on the Pampas, where John got a ride with a real gaucho. Out here, miles from anywhere, we had our first breakdown, and what we needed was a welding job. Imagine our surprise and relief to discover that we could detour across the desert to a government work camp with all the latest equipment. This was a lucky break for us, and we were soon back again on the main road. Our first glimpse of the Switzerland of the Andes, 3,000 square miles of beautiful scenery in the Nahuelhuapi National Forest. Wonderful country for riding. Naturally, we couldn't resist. And the trails were so enticing that we all ended up saddle sore. The area is one of the loveliest spots on earth, and I'm sure we enjoyed our stay at this tiny mountain hotel. The Argentine Motor Club sponsors these fine modern gas stations, but only one includes entertainment. The boys went swimming at every opportunity. December in South America is summer, so the air was warm. The mirror-like blue lakes with jagged cliffs and snowy peaks rising behind them impel you to include this area in your list of favorite scenery. At this point, we turned west toward Chile, where we would travel the whole north-south length of its highway. First, we had to ferry over the lakes. This ferry was so small that we could carry either the Buen Vecino or the carryall, but not both at once. With plenty of advice and lots of volunteer pushers and pullers, we manhandled the trailer onto the narrow ferry boat. Thank goodness for the narrowness and lightness of Buen Vecino. If she had been any bigger, we'd have had many more complications. A short ride, and we disembarked a few miles before reaching the sign that told us we were in Chile, our fifth country. And at the Customs and Immigration Station, all the officials and their families were delighted to pose with us. Then, another and bigger ferry on Lago Todos Los Santos. This time we could load our whole outfit and have all the comforts of a cabin for our long ride across the lake. A voyage dominated by beautiful views of Mount Osorno. Up to now, we had a relatively easy route, but we were prepared for the more arduous part of the journey. We had 3 gas tanks for a total of 45 gallons, an oversized radiator, and an oversized clutch, and Buen Vecino was equipped with a 30-gallon water tank, gas heat, refrigeration, and a tiny electric light plant. We disembarked at the foot of Mount Osorno at the most southern point of our journey, and home in Lansing, Michigan was over 12,000 miles away. Near Valdivia, Chile, we pulled off the highway to celebrate a long Christmas day when the sun didn't set until nearly 10 o'clock at night. Don't know how Rosie managed to find things like decorations, but here we are, having Christmas with all the trimmings. Our presents had a bit of the exotic, but Rosie seemed to like her jacket, ornamented with a native design. John got the softest, squashiest package of all. It turned out to be the granddaddy of Davy Crockett hats. Probably the only one made of real South American puma fur. On it went with a certain amount of good-natured ribbing. The older boys have reached the age of gifts like knives and books, but there was something special for each of the Hammonds. This certainly was our most unusual Christmas to date. Later, Rosie fixed us a real holiday dinner. The only thing I might have changed was giving John that harmonica. All of us were guests at a real Chilean barbecue called an asado. The system isn't formalized with motorized gadgets, but the taste is the same, maybe better when you can whack off a tidbit and lick your fingers. Anyhow, we and the Chileans enjoyed it. We got our first glimpse of the Pacific near Viña del Mar, famous Chilean seaside resort. The bridges were often more impressive than the highways. You always wonder whether to drive fast or slow over ruts like these. Breakdowns of other vehicles could keep you bottled up for days if you're not prepared to go off the road and around. Then back to the Pacific, and a pleasant stay right on the beach with Buen Vecino parked in the grounds of a private club. We visited with Mr. Clark, American consul in Antofagasta, before making a side trip off the main road to see the great copper mine of Chuquicamata, largest in the world. A major part of the economy of Chile is based on mineral exports. Some 11th century ruins in the North Chilean desert were the first of many interesting archaeological sites in this area. The great North Road of Chile, Camino Real, is noted for its horrible washboard surface. This is a dry and desolate area, dusty and a tiring one. We were thankful that we weren't dependent on motels and restaurants. There weren't any. Some days we couldn't even find a loaf of bread to buy, so Rosie baked her own. And up and down we crawled on a shelf of a road. In Peru, we met up with a herd of llamas. In this part of the world, these small members of the camel family are used as beasts of burden and as producers of food and wool. It was cold up here on the Peruvian altiplano at altitudes of over 15,000 feet. We were amazed to see flocks of pink flamingos swimming happily among the floating ice. Heading for Puno, we met nose to nose with 2 Chicagoans going in the opposite direction. The boys nicknamed them the Bristly brothers in honor of their beards. We jogged off the direct road to see Bolivia, and especially Lake Titicaca. Bolivian mud was really hard on both our units as we slowly worked our way through this difficult area. We visited the ruins of Tiwanaku and then La Paz, which lies in a valley. Proud Bolivian policemen raised their flag as we photographed the city. On our return journey, we drove across the Altiplano to visit a great fortress and burial ground of the Inca Indians near Lake Titicaca. The structures were wonderful, and we marveled at the know-how of these ancient people. Several frigid days followed as we moved towards Cuzco, always at 12,000 feet or more. Outside the city of Cuzco, we visited Sacsayhuaman. The mammoth stones were precisely fitted without mortar. The Inca built this fortress in the 1400s and lost it to the Spaniards in 1537. After being disappointed so many times when we tried to photograph native costumes, we were eager to get shots of this girl wearing the historic Indian dress of the Peruvian highlands. There is no road to Machu Picchu, so we hired our own train, a sort of deluxe section car. Semi-jungle surrounded us as we switched back up over the mountain range. Legend has it that this was the original home of the Inca and the place to which they retreated after the Spanish conquest. The mountain setting is remarkable. We paid a final visit to the ruins before leaving Cuzco and moving on toward Lima. Because of the Buen Vecino, we could stop to examine a suspension bridge like this. It didn't matter to us if we had to pull over to let a train of llamas go by. In fact, the reason we wanted to travel with a trailer was to be free to stop anywhere at any time. Our most interesting memories are of incidents like this, and we can honestly say we saw the countries we visited, and not just the major cities like Lima. Founded by Pizarro in 1535, the focus of the city's life is the Plaza de Armas, dominated by the National Palace. South America will always mean mountains to us, and sneaking around the corners, never knowing what we'd meet around the bend. Passing another large vehicle required delicate maneuvering. But finally, we made it to the border of Peru and our last glimpse of its handsome red and white flag. Then into Ecuador, where we waited 20 hours for the Chief of Customs to return and put a stamp on our papers. To get past the missing part of the road, we loaded our rig in 2 pieces, crosswise on a banana canoe. This was a very neat trick, but by now we were old hands at surmounting impassable obstacles. The canoe was powered by a tiny tug fastened at one side. To get us headed in the right direction, we were pulled out into the Guayas River, on which we traveled for 6 hours. As we sailed, hemmed in by jungle, we saw other traffic, and from one of the native boats bought fresh coconuts. Rosie admits she has cooked meals in some funny places, but this was the first time straddled on a canoe. Nothing much for us to do on this trip, but relax and take it easy. But with Steve and Nat to help, the driving, we managed to very well, even on the worst of roads. This canoe trip took us from Zarojilla to Puerto Bolivar in the southern part of Ecuador. The drive from the coast to Quito was magnificent. That's what we wrote home. And didn't even remember that we slid off the road and had to commandeer all the local citizens we could find to give us a tremendous push. I sometimes think you have to get stuck with a trailer in a primitive country to appreciate the real force of manpower. You get a small idea of how gigantic pyramids can be built with nothing but many straining muscles. It took time, but at last we were shoved back on the road. And finally we reached Quito, which lies at the foot of beautiful Pichincha volcano in a high, fertile valley. The Quito Indians, the major element of the population, add color to the daily life. This parade celebrates a religious festival. Quito is the capital of Ecuador. We always enjoyed shopping in the local markets. Of course, we had all learned Spanish before we left home, but there are always new words and new pronunciations. The method may be primitive, but the result's the same. Our second crossing of the equator, this time by road and going from south to north. 90 miles later, we were stopped by a broken axle, and Steve had to hop the bus back to Quito to get a replacement. We slowed to let these cows go by. but a friendly local farmer left a gallon of fresh milk beside our door and invited us to visit him before leaving Ecuador for Colombia. Still mountain roads to negotiate, but not at such tremendous altitudes. We spent a happy weekend park at the country club in Cali, Colombia. Here we could thaw out in a subtropical climate after the cold of the high mountain plateaus. And in Bogota, Steve bought himself this handsome racing bicycle, not exactly a typical souvenir of a trip to South America, but a fantastic bargain down there. Still in the lowlands, we crossed the border into Venezuela, our last South American country. This mile-long suspension bridge over the Chama River cost $2 million. And now a rural pre-Easter parade on the roadside of western Venezuela. Dominant sights of Caracas are the towers of El Silencio and the aerial railway. And at La Guaira, the main seaport of Venezuela, we loaded the Buen Vecino and the carryall to make the jump to Panama. There is absolutely no way to motor overland from South to Central America, and it will be years before there is any road connection. We got back on our own wheels for a short distance through Panama, and then had to resort to the Northern Railway of Panama to take us to the border of Costa Rica. The ride can hardly be compared to the Super Chief, but again it was an interesting new experience. When the train stopped, we had time for a brief swim, for the schedules are very elastic. Off the train and crosswise onto a fishing boat, which took us 150 miles up the coast of Costa Rica from Golfito to Punta Arenas. In Costa Rica, we climbed to the crater rim of Volcano Irasu, and coming back from the 11,000-foot summit, we hit a bad stretch of road and had to get our power winch working. We were getting close to the rainy season and had to expect some road washouts. This part of the Inter-American Highway is so new that the customs building leaving Costa Rica is very primitive. We found a pleasant parking spot on Lake Nicaragua, largest lake in Central America. Nicaragua and Honduras share a mountain range on their borders, and we saw them cutting the huge Honduran mahogany logs in this primitive sawmill. Hardwoods are one of the chief exports of this very undeveloped country. There is so little traffic on this part of the highway, and the road is wide and flat so that we could drive at night. And just over the border of El Salvador, we crossed Cuscatlan Bridge, and on El Salvador's paved highways made good time to the capital city, San Salvador. It's hard to tell all the blue and white flags of Central America apart. This one flew over the National Palace in San Salvador. The great attraction in El Salvador is Volcano Izalco, probably the most photogenic volcano in the world. It was in constant eruption while we were there, and we were parked so close that the dishes rattled all night. 45 more miles of good Salvadorian roads, and we were met at the border of Guatemala by my brother Alex and his family. We followed them into Guatemala City, their home, and went with them in a private railroad car, no less, to see the ruins of Caragua, ceremonial center of the Mayans, established in the middle period of the old Maya Empire, from 633 to 731 A.D. Only the railroad reaches this area between Puerto Barrios on the Atlantic and Guatemala City, where the National Palace and Cathedral dominate the Central Park. This is the new capital city, which was begun in 1776, when earthquake destroyed the old capital called Antigua, one of the great cities of the Spanish colonial period. It is now being restored. With the Buen Vecino, we went out for a farewell family picnic before continuing on to Lake Atitlan, set like a deep blue gem in a triangle of cloud-tipped volcanic peaks. Several small Indian villages hug its shoreline. The Guatemalan Indians dress in colorful costumes, with each village having its own distinctive color combinations. Many of the designs are related to old Mayan symbolism, and as a rule, the women wear a loose huipil or blouse. The skirt is worn either wrapped tight or gathered at the belt. In this colorful area, we pulled past the shore and garden to park in the grounds of wonderful Hotel Husan Yu, meaning nose of the mountain. Then, over the highlands to Chichicastenango, probably the most interesting Indian village in the whole country. We watched men carrying loads weighing up to 300 pounds entering the marketplace. You can have your fortune told by a little bird on the way to church at Santo Tomas, where the Kichi Mayans make their copal incense offerings to their ancestral gods. After these pagan rites, they will go into the church and pray as Catholics. Leaving Chichi, we drove past Santo Tomas, and the Buen Vecino caused quite a stir in the market. Traveling along the mountains is a succession of hairpin turns and steep grades. And near Huehuetenango, we came to the ancient capital of Moms, called Saculeu. Our last adventurous road was from Huehuetenango, Guatemala, to the Mexican border. This 25-mile stretch has been under construction for 5 years. Difficult terrain plus rock slides off the mountains have added to the complications. We got stuck time and time again, but the truck drivers and construction workers pitched in to push and pull us out and keep us moving along. The road was really just a bulldozed track, and the movement of the big cats kept it really chewed up. We managed to keep moving, slowly I must admit, for 15 miles took us 5 tiring days. But using all our gears and power, we finally reached the Rio Salegua. This river is another problem, since it rises as much as 15 feet in 2 hours. Steve was the hero of the occasion when he tied a rope around his waist and managed to get across the swollen river and locate the foreman of the construction crew working on the other side. He talked a blue streak and managed to persuade the man to send over one of the big cats and haul us across the river. We certainly didn't want to retrace our route when Mexico was so near. It didn't take us long to get hitched up, and then we were starting across. We don't honestly recommend swimming with your outfit, but this certainly proved the ruggedness of our vehicles. Buen Vecino actually floated when we got to the deepest part of the river. We had to be hauled up the hill on the opposite shore. To reach a spot where we could dry out. These construction crews may have thought we were the most foolish humans that they had ever met, but they certainly cooperated to get us through. We are proud to be the first ever to make the trip through El Tapón on the section of the Pan American Highway at the Guatemalan-Mexican border. And we were very glad to get out of that canyon to finally head down into Mexico, where there was good hard pavement to speed us on our way. We spent 3 days in Mexico before crossing the border, and 5 days later, we were back home in Lansing, Michigan. 28,000 miles, 21 countries, and 11 months after starting on our South and Central American adventure. Yes, indeed, we'd do it all over again. It was a wonderful journey.